Good morning, Senior Pride here. Now this morning I'm going to talk about the art of silence and the value of small talk. For me, these things are obviously important in a facility because that's where I live, but they're useful anywhere. They have some different uses, and sometimes they can be used in the same kind of sentence or talk or whatever. So first of all, small talk. People, especially for me in this facility, but for most of us anywhere, are going to ask questions that you don't really feel comfortable answering. They're going to say things that seem, from your personal perspective, inane, but they probably make sense from that person's perspective. And sometimes the easiest way to answer is with small talk. Just kind of gently shift the conversation or say something that answers the question without answering the question. So, for instance, yesterday a lady mentioned that I spend a lot of time in my room. She asked me why. I'm thinking, I don't want to answer that. So I just went on and babbled on about how I do a lot of exercise. That seemed to satisfy her. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it worked for me, and that's all that's important. And it got her to stop asking the question. It's none of her business why I spend time in my room versus out there in a facility with people who, honestly, I'm not that excited about and who, well, I don't have a lot in common with. It's that simple. I don't have a lot in common with them. So I enjoy my time on my own. I've always been a bit of an introvert, so why not? Now, in that vein, there's also the issue of silence. Sometimes people ask questions, and they may ask them over and over again, or they may just ask questions that are very inappropriate. Unfortunately, there are some seniors that do have dementia. We know that, and it can lead to kind of this, I call it loose lips, but it's basically they don't have that filter that we used to have, and they say things that, it used to be they might think, maybe this is not appropriate, I shouldn't actually say it. We went through a lot of this with my mother, just blurting out stuff that was very inappropriate. I went through this with a friend. I'm going through this with a friend here. But there's this fella who, as far as I know, I believe he has schizophrenia, and that can also lead to this kind of filter problem. And he'll constantly ask me, do you know who it is? Because he sees my white cane, he knows I'm visually impaired. So he doesn't seem to understand that when I've answered him once, that's all he needs for the answer. So now I've just learned to kind of turn away when he asks the question, do you know who's speaking to you? Do you know who it is? Now, a little sarcasm might shut him down, but it might also hurt his feelings. It might also confuse him and make him think, like, why is she being sarcastic? Why is she being like that to me? So it's easier just to kind of turn away, the implication being, I'm not going to answer that. And so without using words, I've given him an answer. I've said, no, I'm not going to answer that. But there are lots of situations in which both small talk or silence can be very valuable. If people are asking questions repeatedly that are inappropriate, that are none of their business, that you've answered maybe once if you had to out of desperation, silence is a very useful approach. It answers without answers. It says, this is not on the map. We are not doing this. And it says to them, stop. If someone is asking questions that you're really not comfortable with, or they seem to think they know you better than they do, small talk, lovely. It kind of fills in the gaps without actually giving them the answer that is none of their business. And as I said, living in a facility, I have to deal with this all the time. It's actually one of the reasons I stay in my room. But not answering while answering can be very appropriate, because very helpful anyways, because it sends people with the idea that, oh, she's answered me. Maybe it wasn't the answer I was looking for, but okay, whatever. I got an answer. I've seen a few things actually online about silence. People do talk about the value of silence. It really, sometimes it says more than you could ever say with words. Now, a long time ago, I had a friend in Ontario who used to tell children with autism, you can think it in your head, but don't say it with your mouth. And you know what? That applies to all of us. It is a very valuable idea. So sometimes I'm thinking things and I'm thinking, if I said this, whew, so I'm going to think it, I'm going to enjoy the thought, but I'm not actually going to express it. Because, yeah, I have a wonderful sarcastic thought that I'd like to give that man that keeps asking me, can you see me? But I'm not going to do it because he really, in his state, I don't think he'd really understand it, but he might be offended, and it's not necessary to offend him. I can still think the sarcastic thought in my head without speaking. Sometimes we need to think those thoughts. We need to kind of, if you've got a really good imagination like me, you're thinking all the time, boy, I'd really like to answer like this or this. Don't do it. Just think it in your head. Keep your mouth quiet. But those are the times when things like silence or small talk come in really handy, because they deal with the situation without giving away things that are none of anybody's business, without letting you be kind of stomped on or feeling like someone is asking something so inappropriate that it's none of their business. The lady I mentioned that I know here who has dementia, some of the stuff that comes out of her mouth, and this is very common for people with dementia, so inappropriate, very sexually explicit, very concerning. Now, I've expressed concern to the staff here that some of the men here who are maybe not as aware as some of the other fellows may take that as an invitation. I don't think the staff has done anything. I can look out for her to the extent that I can look out for her, but the fact is I'm not going to be there if some guy decides to try to take advantage of that situation. And yes, older people do have sex, so let's just get that out of the way. The problem is rape can also happen. So yes, I am very concerned about what comes out of her mouth. I am very concerned that the staff are not dealing with this. But when she says it to me, again, I use those two ideas, silence and particularly shifting the conversation with small talk. And sometimes I'm very direct. That was not okay. Please don't say that again. Some of the stuff that comes out of her mouth isn't just sexual, it's just disgusting. And those are the times when I say, you really shouldn't talk about that. That's not okay. Does it work? No. And anybody who's dealing with an adult with dementia knows full well that they'll go right back to it. As soon as you tell them 2 minutes later, they're on to the same topic. But for those of us who are dealing with them, at least we're trying. And I always say, at least we're trying. If someone routinely asks inappropriate questions or questions that are none of their business, like this lady last night who wanted to know why I'm always in my room, small talk, very handy. It just kind of shifts them off. And this woman is very bright, very, very there. She just doesn't always know that things that aren't her business aren't her business. And she doesn't seem to realize that we're not friends. We may be acquaintances, but that's about it. So these things can be very helpful in these kinds of situations. How you communicate affects outcome. When I'm dealing with staff here, I'm always like upbeat, small talk, never talk about anything that I wouldn't want them putting in a report or expressing to people inappropriately or getting the wrong idea, because the staff here tends to have some very ignorant ideas about older people and disabled people, very ignorant ideas. So I have learned the hard way that I really have to keep my personal thoughts to myself, anything I'm thinking, but zip those lips. But small talk, lovely. When they start going on about how hard the job is, I'm just, oh yeah, I remember when I was working, and oh yeah, I hear ya. But I don't actually tell them anything. That is a very valuable skill. It means that they will not be thinking, well, look at her, she's in the past, or look at her, she's upset. I'm not upset, I'm just expressing something. But here, certainly in a facility, certainly with people who have, if you're dealing with people who have very ignorant ideas about aging, stick with the small talk. It means that they think they're getting a conversation, but they're not getting something that they can misinterpret and misunderstand and use inappropriately. So it can be useful in all kinds of environments. If you're dealing with a doctor or a dentist and it becomes clear that they don't necessarily respect those confidentiality and privacy laws, or that they don't understand that just because you're older doesn't mean you've lost your mind, again, give them the facts they need to have as a medical practitioner, but then for everything else, just kind of stick with the small talk. Hold back what isn't valuable to your health assessment or whatever is going on. Keep control of the conversation. The most important thing you can do is keep on top of it, so you know what's going out into the world. They don't have to know, but you do. And those things are very valuable. With that, I say adieu.